Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Blitzkrieg, our own strategic affairs show. Today, I have a special guest on my show, Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain, former GOC 15 Corps, former GOC 21 Corps, and also Chancellor, Central University of Kashmir. Sir, welcome to our show.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to talk about a topic that is emotional to me and also to General Hasnain. Both of us are from the infantry. And there is a neglect of the infantry, so to say, in the sense that we need bigger platforms, we need our Rafales, we need our tanks, we need our artillery, we need our ships. But finally, it is the infantryman who holds ground. But this is just one aspect of the entire conversation today. We are going to talk about much, much more. So let us start. Sir, this entire thing about infantry being neglected, it comes to mind, sir. I visited my unit and I visited so many other infantry units. The rifle is always a cause of concern. Now, thankfully, we are getting new rifles. But for a very long time, this rifle, since the early 90s, has been a cause of concern. You yourself have spoken about 5.56 versus the 7.62. I've read your article, sir, where you've spoken about this, how you need much more hitting power. But the overall neglect of the infantry who sheds the most amount of blood as far as contribution is concerned. We agreed in our previous show in which we discussed the Siachen Glacier, sir. You did mention that most of the casualties were from infantry. If anybody goes to the National War Memorial, you'll find that most of the names written, not all, but most of the names, the lion's share of the names are from the infantry. Sir, where does this neglect originate from? Why this neglect?
Gaurav, thank you. Firstly, let me compliment you for your choice of the subject today. And as you said, it's very close to our hearts because both of us belong to the infantry. But that does not in any way dilute the importance of other arms, because I think as your viewers need to realize, the Indian Army, armies around the world are all about teamwork. It's all about different arms and services putting their act together, and nothing can work if only a single arm performs and the others do not. So at the beginning, we need to make sure and mention this aspect that it's all about teamwork. The infantry is traditionally known as the queen of the battle, the one which takes the brunt of the pressure in battle. It's the one which takes most of the casualties, as you have just brought out about the National War Memorial. What I reckon is that somewhere down the line, as we have been transiting through period of the last 35, 40 years, the idea that it is the bigger platforms, it is, much more expensive equipment, state-of-the-art equipment, that is the kind of things which actually brings about deterrence. And deterrence is a very important aspect of national security strategy. But at the same time, most people do not realize that while you're working on deterrence, you have to simultaneously work on your war-fighting capability. And war-fighting capability is current to the times that you are existing in. And today we realize that most wars are hybrid, irregular in nature, where the infantry and maybe many other arms also perform an infantry role. And therefore, actually making sure that the cutting edge of your army is well equipped, well trained, fully sharpened to perform on the ground doesn't escape anyone's attention. But somehow down the line, it has escaped attention. And I draw your attention to this sometime around the year 2003, 2004, after the invasion of Iraq by the United States, you found the word transformation becoming a very important issue. And transformation was all about, changing the concept of war, understanding how training has to be done. Doctrines were undergoing a change, and the Indian Army also entered into this sphere of carrying out transformation. For the better part of 7 or 8 years, 2003 to 2011 or so, we seriously undertook transformation. We took it to the government after a series of studies on this. And in that, I do remember that the infantry's role was always highlighted. But somewhere down the line, we could not convince the government about transformation, which would have been a very comprehensive way of changing the manner of warfighting. And thereafter, once again, the whole romantic idea of deterrence continued to remain. And the necessity of expensive platforms, high technology, all that. No one takes that away from anything. But the aspect of the infantry, which is the cutting edge in the hybrid war conditions, even in conventional war, or for example in the mountains, where most of India's borders are along the mountainous terrain, the infantry is the one which is the arm which needs primacy. And that is the arm that we have been neglecting, as you have observed in your initial remarks.
So my contention here is that you spoke about deterrence, which of course is like an insurance policy of the nation. But what happens when the enemy changes the game? When we talk about deterrence, sir, we are talking generally about conventional operations. We are talking about war fighting in a conventional scenario. But as you rightly mentioned, and you have said it so many times, in the media, in the print media, on the electronic media, you have mentioned it so many times that what we have upon us today is asymmetric warfare. You have spoken about grey zone warfare. You have spoken about non-contact, non-kinetic warfare. And you're one of the people in the country who keeps on saying that, okay, guys, wake up, let us look here as well. Don't ignore conventional operations, but also have a clear understanding that what we are facing today is non-contact / grey zone warfare. Now, sir, my contention here is that, we speak about deterrence. When we speak about deterrence, it is generally in terms of conventional operations. But today we are not faced with conventional operations as such. I mean, when they happen, when the balloon goes up, the balloon will go up, sir. But today, even if it is a person from the Armored Corps or the artillery or AD or even ASC and AOC, almost everybody in the Kashmir Valley is doing an infantry role. So mostly they're doing infantry roles, and they're doing it very well. You brought that out in the previous episodes as well, sir. When can we think about deterrence in terms of non-conventional operations? So when can we think about deterrence? Also give due importance to this fact that when we talk about deterrence, we are also talking about hybrid warfare and grey zone warfare.
Absolutely, very well put. Let me put it this way. Despite it having antiquated weaponry, equipment, etc., the infantry has continued to perform, and particularly in irregular hybrid war conditions. We have delivered. We have brought the strength of terrorists from 7,000 odd down to 250, 300. And in the course, we have lost a lot of manpower. We have lost a lot of our brave men. Somehow the numbers in this case haven't really been appreciated in India, because now, of course, we are getting much more sensitive to it. With the visuals that we have every other day of retooling ceremonies and things like that, people are getting much more sensitive to it. And there is a necessity that it's being realized now that the element which faces the brunt of the hybrid war, faces the brunt of irregular warfare, needs to be equipped far better. Now, it's not just a question of equipping him with a handheld weapon, which is sufficient. I would say that an infantry soldier really needs personal protection, number one. Number two, he needs a lethal weapon in his hands. In addition to that, he needs other means of being able to inflict casualties on the enemy, that is high quality grenades and things like that. He needs support weapons within the infantry itself. He needs surveillance equipment, state-of-the-art surveillance equipment which should have the night fighting capability. He needs communications, and he needs mobility. When you put all this together, you've come to a wholesome, full infantry soldier. Unfortunately, there seems to be some kind of a notion in the minds of people that give an infantryman a weapon, a high-quality weapon, and he will perform, he will fight. He will, there's no doubt about it. But it is this wholesome aspect which has somehow been missing. The infantry directorate went into very great detail on this and came out with the whole concept of the future infantry soldier as a system, what is called FINSAS. You are aware of this, and for many years this project has been pursued. It's a project which has somehow been imported, absorbed from the whole idea of NATO, even Israel, making the soldier a system by himself. So my emphasis is, once again, it has to be a system. It cannot just be a single element of that system. Unfortunately, somewhere down the line, what has happened is, we pegged our ideas, our ambitions maybe a little too high. And somehow the capability to deliver on this, as far as vendors were concerned, as far as manufacturing was concerned, somehow didn't match our vision, our ideas of the future. And that is why we seem to have suffered in the recent past.
Sir, a lot of people seem to think, and now this is not a question, sir, this is just a comment. A lot of people seem to think that the GSQRs which we make are possibly not, I would not generalize it, sir, but generally what happens is that the GSQRs are more fancy than practical, is what a lot of people say, and the jury is still out in the open for that, sir. I go to my next question. We talk about specialist infantry units for desert, riverine, mountains, CT ops, CI ops, with limited turnover of personnel, sir, to afford the peace field paradigm, as we call it, sir. So we are talking about specialist infantry units for deserts. Now today, sir, we have Mod M, sir, for example, or we have Mod D, sir, modification mountain, modification desert, etc., etc. Now we're talking here about specialist infantry units. How feasible is that, sir? Should we go ahead with this?
I can boast of one thing, that I was one of the few people, maybe 20, 25 years ago, even when I was commanding my unit, and subsequently thereafter at the higher command course, I used to always propose and project this idea that we have a very generalist kind of a concept of our infantry. Considering the fact that we've got diverse terrain, riverine, desert, DCB, mountains, all kinds of terrain that is available to us, and our infantry battalions tend to become so generalistic. They move from terrain to terrain and don't seem to specialize in any terrain. They come from the mountains into plains, start integrating with armor, with mechanized infantry. For the better part of a year, they're found wanting. Just about the time when they start performing, you find the unit's marching orders are there to go to a CI environment somewhere. Even the concept of training is such that collective training takes place in a cycle of once in 3 years. Major collective training exercises are conducted only once in 3 years. So in your complete stay in a peace station in a part of a desert corps, the infantry unit may never get a chance to even do collective training. So there is, in my mind, there is a need to consider this. This can be debated for long as to should we therefore possibly look at specialist infantry units which know the basic infantry role. That, of course, you cannot, there can be no departure from that. But specialize in perhaps desert and high altitude, or riverine and mountains or hilly terrain or something like that, to limit the amount of expertise that is required of those units. And that they can keep flitting in and out. They can keep moving in and out from different environment to this other environment. If necessary, the RR concept, which is the unit being static and men turning over, has been found to be very successful. Can this concept possibly be partially adopted? Because we have got this big problem of a peace field paradigm, which most arms, or rather most armies of the world don't really face, because most of them believe in a tour of duty of 6 months. Now, our borders being so vast, our commitment to operations being so intense, we cannot afford to have 6-month tenures for our infantry units.
Yes, sir.
Our tenures will have to be 2 years, 2.5 years, going up to 3 years, right? And therefore, it is important, therefore, that we maintain this paradigm, and at the same time ensure the expertise of our infantry soldiers being developed in a particular environment, or at least 1 or 2 different environments.
So, we have faced this problem a lot of times, as movement of infantry troops from place A to place B. Because you have the mechanized forces, sir, which include mechanized infantry, include armored corps. Now, infantry has always had a crunch of transportation. So, do you think we need more transportation in the infantry, so we not avoid, but sort of have a lesser dependence upon second line transport, which anyway can be used for dumping artillery ammunition or logistics, etc. It can be used in many other roles. But do you think that we need more transportation for the infantry, sir?
You see, Gaurav, the soldiers of yore, that is people who served in the 60s and 70s, etc., will always tell you that the most important element of mobility of an infantry soldier are his 2 feet. And victory is always measured by the pace of the infantry.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely, sir.
But the world has changed. The question of rapidity of operations, you see, with air mobile operations coming in and things like that, everyone is looking at very intense operations in a very rapidly changing environment. A very good example could be that in the good old days, in the 60s, 70s, 80s even, we used to look at a warning period of 7 days. It got reduced to a warning period of 4 days, perhaps, to be able to move, to start mobilizing. But that mobilization would take you to your concentration areas, to your assembly areas, and you would wait for a very long period of time, as you did in 2002 in Operation Parakram. And that would not demand of you an immediate movement of infantry units here or there. You were as a part of a formation and you would continue remaining there. A little bit of shift here and there would take place. That has all undergone a change after 2001, 2002, 2003. Now most of our operations are incident based, in the sense that if there is a major incident which has a political strategic impact on the rest of India, has an impact on the world and the geopolitics of the world, obviously you're going to respond very quickly. And I think the IBG concept, the integrated battle groups concept, always talks about going in as little as 2 days, 3 days. The strike corps are being dismantled for this particular purpose. So having said all this, the infantry cannot be afforded to remain rooted to its 2 feet. It needs to be much more mobile. The mechanized infantry obviously has got mobility with it, it's got protection, it's got firepower. But the infantry needs a degree of self-sufficiency. My experience in higher ranks has always sort of revealed to me that the vehicle fleets of your second line transport, third line transport are so intensely flogged during peacetime that when it comes to operations, you will find 50-60% availability. And that is not going to afford you the chance to be able to carry out your rapid build-up, the rapid build-up of ammunition, dumping, logistics which have to be carried out simultaneously. So ultimately, the speed of your operations is going to get held up with all this. The infantry needs an amount of self-dependence or self-capability of transportation. And I think this aspect has not been paid sufficient attention to. In highly intense operational areas today, you find, I found at a time in about 7, 8, 10 years ago, when light vehicles, there were just no light vehicles in India, in the Indian Army. We had a reserve of the Army headquarters was down to 3 vehicles at one particular time. So we need to pay much more attention to this to bridge the gap at that particular time. We had a series of different makes and models of cars and of that kind of equipment coming in all of a sudden and in different colors. There were even red, white and blue colors which were coming in to make good for that. And we were expected to carry out operations with all that. It is fine in a CIE environment. But tomorrow, if you have to go to conventional operations, you need a structured form of transport. And I think that needs a little more focus.
Now, sir, having travelled extensively in the recent years in J&K, sir, or especially in that Jammu axis of Delta Force, sir, Doda Kishtwar area, complete Doda Kishtwar area, also Udhampur side, sir. Now, I'm not being area specific here. I just want to know, sir, that there are places where terrorism is on the wane, and we also discussed in previous episodes that we need to wait for at least 4 to 5 years before we say that an area is terror-free. Let's not celebrate prematurely is what you had said, and I absolutely agree with you. My question is different, sir. Are we also to look at, or would it be a good idea to look at a conventional role for Rashtra Rifles? Because they stay in one place, they know the lay of the land very well. It is only a matter of equipment change or training or back-end supplies and logistics. But do you think it is possible if we look at a conventional role for Rashtra Rifles?
I can kill it in a single sentence that yes, This aspect has been looked at for long, and some capability, conventional capability in the defensive environment has always been considered for the Rashtriya Rifles, and this is a very classified matter. It carries on going under discussion. But let's look at the rationale for all this. When I explain this to people, I always tend to look at the example of what's happening in Pakistan. The Frontier Constabulary, the FC as it's called, I think it's got 118 wings today. Now, if you remember the year 2007, all of a sudden after the Lal Masjid incident, there was a sudden upsurge of a lot of terror activities internally within Pakistan, and the Frontier Constabulary was the one which used to go in for a lot of operations in the northwest region. And we used to hear whole companies being taken prisoner.
Yes,
by the terrorists, right? There were mass casualties among them. They were the most untrained force. Obviously, they couldn't sustain these kind of operations. Subsequently, $750 million worth of equipment was earmarked for them as a part of the U.S. Package, the aid package to Pakistan. And you find in a couple of years, the FC developed and came to the levels of actually starting to replace the regular infantry in certain areas along the plains. Now, if I consider the FC of the Pakistan Army as the RR of the Indian Army, and the RR is class above. The RR 63 units is an outstanding asset that you have developed. Somehow we have not been able to convince the people in the hierarchy, the people who hold the budget in their hands, who look at the aspect of force development and things like that. The RR in India continues to languish under a extension, a temporary extension of a year, 2 years, 3 years. I'm told it's given a 5-year extension recently, but it still remains under a temporary kind of a system. And that isn't the best way of looking at things. The RR, to my mind, is a major asset today and should not be looked upon as just a pure counter-insurgency or a counter-terrorism force. It has, if you ask me, if any force has actually delivered in Jammu and Kashmir, it is the Rashtriya Rifles. It is probably the boldest and the finest experiment. It is based on the infantry. It is the infantry, 55% of it is the infantry which is based on it. And then there's an all-arms content inside it. And probably the world should be looking at this particular model. And that is why I still continue to say that the RR should be given more than just the CI and CT capability, should be trained for it. And now, as you have mentioned yourself, south of the Pir Panjal, things are better. We are now in the 5th, 6th, 7th year of that period in which there is a general absence of turbulence in the region between the Pir Panjal and the Jammu sector itself. And perhaps this is a time when the RR can, in bits and pieces, carry out conventional training. And it will act as a force multiplier as far as the Indian Army is concerned.
So, now the next question which I have in mind, sir, is something that infantry CEOs may not be very, very happy about, sir. I mean, if they see this program, I'm going to get a lot of phone calls, and sir, so will you, I think. The thing is that, is it time for audit of infantry units, sir? Too much of generalization, not enough specialization, the ability of an infantry soldier to be trained in one specific weapon. Is it time for an audit of infantry battalions, a technical audit, if I may, sir?
No, this is a very challenging question. I would not call it an awkward question. It's a very challenging question. And many years ago, I remember in the 80s, the infantry directorate gave out directions for dual trade concept. You would probably remember in the 90s, there used to be a dual trade concept, which is still existing very much, that every soldier needs more than just his simple trade. He needs to be a specialist in something, etc. I'm not sure how seriously this was carried out completely. It may be existing today. The infantry has, of course, achieved a lot, tremendous amount. But today, the problem is that most of the expertise of the infantry today is judged from a CICT angle. if I land up on the line of control as a senior commander and ask a company commander to brief me, he will probably start by briefing me on his counter-infiltration role rather than on his conventional role. That is something which we need to take stock of. And that brings me to this particular aspect of audit of the infantry. Why take any other example? Take the example of the artillery. I think the artillery is one arm which carries out its internal audit in a very serious way. The training audit. Every regiment undergoes a practice camp every year in which you will find the instructor's gunnery coming from different, who've been nominated by the artillery directorate, who've been probably someone coming in from the school of artillery. And there's a whole team there which is there to inspect the unit during the practice camp. And at the end of it, there's a very serious report with a checklist, which everything is ticked off or minused off. And this report is a classified report which goes up the line, becomes a part of the annual training report of that year, of that unit. I don't know, even while I was in service, I used to always look at the artillery and say, my God, gunners have really got their act together. They really know how to do it. And I somehow felt maybe we have not done enough in the infantry. That is one of the reasons why perhaps the infantry has considered itself to be too generalistic. And maybe it's not possible with 380 or more than that number of units to do internal audit every year. Possibly you could do it in 2 years. You could possibly do it in 3 years. Maybe at the end of a training cycle or the end of a stay at a peace station before it moves out to a field area into an operational environment, maybe an training audit should be carried out. A format of that, they can develop on their own, but the necessity of this, that is the aspect which a lot of infantry officers will debate against it. But perhaps some of us who know the internal working of the infantry would perhaps plead that time has come for us to get more focused on particular trades. For example, I would say that every single soldier of a unit should be trained to fire a missile. He should be trained to fire an MMG. At the moment, we are still finding an MMG as a company support weapon, so there will be still some specialist elements from a company who will be as a part of the MMG section. Maybe even signalers, and you and I will agree that the best people of an infantry battalion are usually the signalers and the intelligence section people. Many more people need to develop those qualities which the signalers and the intelligence section has developed over a period of time, and that will add to the quality of the soldiers in the infantry itself. So I am for it completely. A trial perhaps on that is necessary.
You're talking about maybe a modification of the ADAM inspection which happens, sir. So while the ADAM inspection can go on, but you're saying twice or thrice in one, let's say in one peace tenure or one operational tenure or field tenure, you should have a detailed technical inspection, especially of skills, because that is what the infantry is about, sir. Of course about the weapons, of course about the equipment, but more about individual skill of the person. Sir, I come to the last question of this episode, and something that has been very dear to me for a long time. Long back, sir, during our time, they used to have this rifle called the 7.62 mm Dragunov, the sniper rifle now. And they always said that the ammunition is, not available, and training ammunition is not there, and it's restricted. So you had your first lines, etc., but no training ammunition. It's only when we went on the line of control, ammunition was given, but we rarely fired that weapon. Now, how important is sniping? We have seen Pakistanis using it very effectively. And I remember during an interaction, sir, you had mentioned that sniping is also a culture, not just an art. It is a culture that needs to be inculcated within the Indian Army. It is a force multiplier. The sheer shock value of a bullet coming out of nowhere, maybe from a kilometer or 2 kilometers away, sir. And the Americans have used it to devastating effect against insurgent forces in Iraq and also against the Taliban in Afghanistan, sir. What do you feel about snipers in an infantry battalion?
Gaurav, I'm reminded of the great American movie, Hollywood movie, American Sniper, which is all from Iraq. I can recall movies of the Second World War where I can't recall the name of the movie, but the tremendous...
yes, sir. Enemy at the gate, sir. Enemy at the gate.
Enemy at the gate. That's right. Where a Russian sniper against a German sniper. The whole movie is built up on that particular theme. But having said that, let me say, I think the Indian Army has got his act together and they are doing a lot on this aspect of sniping at the moment. But we need to be just generally aware that this is in the interim period, perhaps before we once again took this on as an aspect of culture and art of the infantry. There had been a little bit of a downscaling in this importance, and suddenly out of the blue we found that on the line of control we were being hit, and that's how we perhaps developed this whole response again, and today things are far better. But having said that, when we come down to it, sniping is an art, sniping is a culture, absolutely. In an infantry battalion, I remember when I joined my battalion, the first thing I was put into was a firing competition, an inter-unit small arms firing competition. I must have fired not less than 40,000 rounds in that period while practicing, and my ears today I don't hear very well is primarily because of the impacting of that particular experience of 40,000 rounds being fired next to my ears. And those were the days when we never used earmuffs and things like that, because we always had that macho aspect of an infantry soldier on a range. How can you, in front of your men, ever wear earmuffs and things like that? But having said that, we used to always look for the best firers of the unit and develop their fine skills, because not only in competitions, but we knew that when you come to the line of control, this is going to be a very important aspect. In Siachen, on the very first day of my command, I lost an officer to a firing which took place from 4 kilometers away. On my post, on an officer who had just welcomed me into the unit, and 2 minutes later, he was no more, because he died of a bullet. Whether that bullet came from a sniper or whether it was a stray bullet, I'm not sure. But I'm just saying that the feasibility of imposing a casualty at 4 kilometers distance still continues to exist. And magnification with the instruments that are available for sniping today is many times more. Earlier, you only had, whatever was the state of the art at that time, you only had essential prismatic kind of equipment. Today, you have got far better equipment than that. And with that, night is day, and the distances of 4 or 5 kilometers are like 100 meters and 200 meters in front of you. If you are not making use of this technology, then it is sacrilege. And in eyeball to eyeball contacts of the type which exist on the line of control nowhere else in the world, if you are not making use of this capability, if you are not developing this capability, then you are not doing yourself service or not doing your troops good service.
Absolutely, sir. It's more like I've often thought of snipers as ghosts who are hunting, because you can't see them, you don't know. And if the sniper is smart, sir, you'll not know where the bullet is coming from. You can hide the muzzle flash, and you can do so many other things which they're trained for. And I think we need to put our best foot forward, sir, get the best of sniper training in place. So many weapons, including the 50 caliber long-range guns and anti-material rifles, have come into the Indian Army, and they are coming in every month. New equipment is coming up, sir, and training is also going on. And I think this is something that will give us some sort of primacy on the line of control, which we already have. But as far as snipers are concerned, sir, I think this is a very valid point that you brought out. Thank you very much for joining us, sir, for this episode of Blitzkrieg. Ladies and gentlemen, I discussed the infantry, the queen of battle, with Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain, and General Hasnain told us about how the infantry training can be improved and what is the importance of infantry. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I'll meet you in a couple of days with another episode of Blitzkrieg. Till then, from my team and I, Jai Hind.